Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the War Within 20th Anniversary Update, otherwise known as the patch 11.05, has saw a bunch of new class changes as of this week. Over the last couple of updates, we took a look at the massive revamps coming to the flavorful, or what now is going to be the flavorful, Dark Ranger playstyle, the awesome class changes and talent adjustments for Elemental and Enhancement Shamans, the Rogue rework that we've been waiting for so long, the Paladin class talent tree restructure, but the class of Druid has also seen some additional changes. Restoration and Balance Druid are particularly getting a bit of more of a highlight, where their talent tree shape and structure isn't really seeing a lot of new changes, but there's a slew of new talents being added that'll hopefully encourage some new and fresher gameplay variety for those two Druid specs in particular. And that's what I want to do in today's video, is to highlight all of the balance and rest changes happening in the future War Within build. As always, if you guys want to see more regular War Within updates like these for future updates, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. Otherwise, let's dive right in. So when it comes to Druid changes, let's first start out slow with some of the more generalized additions, which isn't a lot really. We have things such as your rate buffs like Mark of the Wild, which is very similar to other classes, also seeing a bit of a reduction in mana cost from 4% down to 1, which is, I guess, a little nice. Though for Druids, most of the changes have been cosmetic, like the icon for Convoke the Spirits is a little different. I've done this a lot for some of the other Covenant, or used to be Covenant abilities, now class abilities, to make it less of Covenant-esque, but more class-esque. So they gave it more of a purple look instead of a blue. And I think the model used to be an obvious Night Elf, but I think this one could either be like a Troll or a Night Elf, depending on how you look at it. The only other new icon is that of the Adaptive Swarm, which doesn't look like Adaptive Swarm. That looks like a Demon Hunter ability. Hold on a second, that doesn't look like Adaptive Swarm at all. Put it over here. Yeah, that does not look like Adaptive Swarm at all. That straight up looks like a Demon Hunter. Okay, so maybe they might have to adjust these things. But that is hilarious. Yeah, Adaptive Swarm, I guess, is supposed to look like the one down there, which is green bugs instead of turquoise bugs icon, but I guess that's nice. It's good that they're updating all these things, but I guess I'll need to try again next week or something. And besides this though, while we're on the Feral Druid, Druid of the Claw, Ravage is getting a bit better of a window when you can consume the ability. Over on the live realms, when Ravage procs, you need to consume it within 15 seconds of the ability procking. They're now increased it to 20-second windows, so I guess it's a little bit nicer if you need to delay Ravage for any reason as a Feral or a Guardian Druid. Though a vast majority of these Druid changes are going to focus on the specs like Balance and Restoration, with Balance getting basically a familiar looking talent tree, but there's a lot of little talents interwoven in there in order to make certain playstyles and synergies and abilities work well together or work in new interesting ways. So to start things off, let's go over the new talents that will be found in your talent tree, such as a more passive version of the wild mushroom called the Sunseeker Mushroom. Sunfire damage has a chance to grow a magical mushroom at a target's location. After cancelled, or I guess after a few seconds, the mushroom detonates, dealing exactly the same amount of damage as a wild mushroom, but passively, also generating 20 astral power based on a target's hit. So they actually increase the astral power generation of mushrooms in general, but it's more of a passive mushroom that can spawn from your Sunfires. And from doing some light testing, the mushroom spawns fairly regularly. I don't really know if it's actually going to be better to use the on-use mushrooms or the passive mushrooms, but I feel like whenever I'm hitting train dummies, it does spawn pretty regularly. There's another new talent called Whirling Stars, which modifies the way Celestial Alignment works. You can either have Celestial Alignment reduced to 2-minute cooldown, where you also add this massive blast of astral damage on applying Stealth Light to targets, or you can actually reduce the cooldown of Celestial Alignment down by 75 seconds, and now the ability has 2 charges, but its duration has been cut back by 40%, which gives you a different way to play around with Celestial Alignment, turning it from a 3-minute cooldown either to a 2-minute cooldown, or with this talent, 1.3-minute recharge cooldown with 2 charges and a 9-second duration. I generally like talents like these, where they allow you to play around a little bit with your cooldowns, like giving you a second charge of that cooldown but reduces duration, which allows you to have a bit more flexibility of when you use those cooldowns during specific windows. Of a balanced Druids, this would give them an opportunity to weave in this talent for 9 seconds during very key burst situations, but also I guess to start using the ability of Celestial Alignment fairly regularly. From there on, we got other talents that improve Boomkin's scaling with stats such as Astronomical Impact, the critical strike damage of your astral spells is increased by 20%. Now there's a lot of abilities of Balancer that deal astral damage, primarily something like Star Surge. Star astral damage is a combination of nature as well as arcane. So when it says it buffs the damage of your astral abilities, I believe it cannot buff the damage of things like Starfire, which is arcane, which is like partial astral damage. Unless it's supposed to be astral damages in both astral nature as well as the arcane, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be specifically astral damage. So Star Surge, Starfall, things such as your Stellar Flare, any big unused abilities such as New Moon, as well as Fury of a Loon, and potentially even anything that deals astral damage from a Loon's chosen hero talents. So basically a huge portion of your big spender and harder hitting abilities. So this means that Boomkins are gaining a little bit more burst with all those hard hitting spells critting and doing more damage when they crit, but it also allows you to invest into the stats such as Critical Strike in order to create a little bit better output and gives you a little bit more stat diversity. Besides, there's been a couple of other options such as Crashing Star, which has a modified version of Shooting Stars, where Shooting Stars has a 50% chance to set call down a Crashing Star that deals a little bit more astral damage than the basic one, quite a bit in fact, and generates for astral power. Shooting Stars are normally proc from Moonfire and Sunfire damage over time effects, and from me testing out the damage of this ability, I wasn't as impressed with it compared to like Mushrooms, for example. I felt like Mushrooms were procking a lot more regularly. Crashing Stars do proc here and there once in a while, but they don't really seem to do nearly as much damage as I want them to. I think it's just the uptime of it. So if you could have maybe more procs, or maybe if they gave it instead of like, hey, there's a 15% chance to proc a Crashing Star, maybe like every so many Shooting Stars you generate a guaranteed Crashing Star, I think that would add a little bit more consistency for this talent in general. But if you can get more Shooting Stars, and you can do that actually with Wimkin, if you can get more Shooting Stars to proc more regularly, then you could potentially see more Crashing Stars and therefore more damage. To help that talent work a little bit better, we do have other talents such as Hail of Stars, where casting a free Star Surge or Starfall grants you Solstice for 3 seconds. This is actually an upgrade talent from the talent of Touch of Cosmos. Casting Wrath in an Eclipse has a 12% chance to make an next Star Surge or Starfall free. Casting Starfire when in an Eclipse has an 80% chance to make a next Star Surge or Starfall free. And I believe this talent will also synergize together with someone like Starweaver, where Star Surge has a chance to make a Starfall free and Starfall has a chance to make a next Star Surge free. Because this talent also synergizes with something such as Convoke the Spirits, because during Convoke you're casting free versions of all these spells, and when you do cast a free version of the Star Surge or Starfall, it actually generates you 1 second of Solstice instead. And you can see kind of whenever I get a random free proc of Starfall, I can just immediately send it, and you'll see at the top right I have Solstice for a few seconds, which allows you Shooting Stars to proc more often. And when I Convoke, you can see that Solstice proc it for just a second and then disappears, procs for a second, disappears, procs for a second, and disappears, depending on the spells you end up casting as a druid. So the more Star Surges or Starfall you cast during Convoke, the longer uptime you could have of that Solstice buff in general, which could proc you even more Shooting Stars. And like we mentioned earlier, proc Shooting Stars allows you more chances for Crashing Stars to proc, so potentially there could be some obvious synergies there as well. But to make that synergy even better, they also added the talent of Circle of Life and Death. Moonfire, Soundfire, Stellar Flare, and Starfall deal their damage in 20% less time, and your healing over time effects in 15% less time. This is a little bit more survivability because you can press Rejuve and that'll heal you a little bit faster. But primarily this is going to be huge for anything that deals damage. So Shooting Stars, your dot damage, even someone like Stellar Flare could get a bit of dot damage. Your Starfall, which means its damage could just happen faster. You don't have to wait as long of a time for all of your Starfall stars to shoot out at the target. So it just means overall more damage. And like I said before, it has a bit of that synergy that kind of ties back into Shooting Stars, ties back into Crashing Stars, and now you're having these talents that kind of interweave together a little bit, or at least play off of each other in one way or another, which I find interesting, this dot synergy mechanic. And Boomkins for the most part do apply their dots mostly to get the mastery proc in order to deal more damage to the target, but there are a handful of talents that allow them to really lean into damage over time gameplay. And now together with the talent of Circle Life and Death, you have Moonfire, Sunfire, Shooting Stars that are proccing off of your dot, Starfalls that are dealing passive damage as well. It really allows you to lean into this passive damage over time components of the playstyle. And that's going to be basically all of the new talents that have been added into the balanced talent tree, but you can see the structure of the talent tree hasn't changed too much. I've adjusted my talents to mostly pick up all of the new talents, but I do wonder how many of these will actually get a lot of play going forward. Besides this, boom kits have gained a couple of other quality of life stuff, such as Starfall, no longer being on the talent tree, just baseline given, and deals 10% more damage. I mentioned earlier the wild mushrooms generate more astral power now, and they on tooltip right now generate up to 20, even though it's supposed to be mushrooms generate 10 astral power instead of 5. But maybe they just buffed it in a recent hotfix. The astral power generation for Fury Loon, however, did get reduced a little bit from a 40% value down to 30%, which is a slight change. Also, Nature's Grace no longer has any damage amplifying components. It simply reduces the cast speed of your next Starfires as well as Wraths. Talents such as Umbral Intensity have been reduced down to a single talent point, so you no longer have to invest 2 talent points in order to pick it back up. Also, it increases the damage of his Solar Eclipse Wraths by 20% instead of 15, Lunar Eclipse Starfires by 15, and the damage Starfire does to nearby targets by 30. The talent of Vassal Smolder's proc rate has been reduced a little bit down to a 35% chance, but the damage amplification, the dot effect, has been increased from 50% to 60, so it's a little bit of like a less proc rate, but a little bit more beefier damage every time you get it. Talents such as Balance of All Things have actually lost a little bit of critical strike buff effectiveness from a 10 to 20, depending on how many talent points you spend, down to 8% and 16% at full 2 talent points, so a little bit less crit value there. Orbit Breaker has also been slowed down a little bit and now shoots out a full moon at every 30th shooting star instead of every 25 shooting stars. And also Power of Golden has been reduced down to a single talent point, but apparently its damage has been reduced by 35%. Another talent that actually popped into this one is Astral Communion, which also been adjusted. This talent no longer grants additional astral power when entering an eclipse. This is primarily to try to adjust balance druids because there are situations where they can sometimes generate way too many resources and they don't have enough globals in order to be able to get into an eclipse and start spending those resources effectively, so it can lead to a resource waste. They're trying to adjust it a little bit. Astral Communion now gives you additional 20 astral power to work with, at least the cap or the pool of astral power to work with, and upon entering Eclipse, it reduces the astral power cost of your next Star Surge or Starfall by 15. Lastly, if you are playing your boom kit as a Keeper of the Grove, because of the changes to Celestial Alignment and the talent of Whirling Stars, they wanted to make sure the Keeper of the Grove can adjust to the Whirling Stars talent. So something like Potent Enchantments has Whirling Stars added as part of its tooltip and how it functions with the Whirling Stars ability. And the same has been done for the talent of Control the Dream as well, and how it affects your Celestial Alignment depending if you are talented into that 2 charge talent or not. But Balance Druid is not the only spec that saw a few changes. Also, Restoration has gotten a couple of adjustments as well, with a flurry of brand new talents populating a talent tree without necessarily changing the structure of the talent tree, very similar to what happened to boom kits, but there are some new stuff being added in this week's build also. From the blue post, we have a new talent that isn't actually in the game right now. It might have been their last build. And maybe it got pulled this build, or maybe it was never implemented in the first place, but it's called Reactive Resin. When your restoration hearts are removed by enemies, they are replaced with Reactive Resin, which heals allies over 6 seconds. Multiple stacks of this effect can overlap. And I can't find this talent in the passive talent tree or anywhere, so maybe it's something that's going to be available in future, but it's more of a PvP specific talent that allows you to have some kind of like a healing over time protection when, if there's a class like a priest or a shaman, they could purge all of your hearts from an ally. It was interesting at first that they added that as a baseline talent and not a PvP talent or anything like that, because there's no reactive resin here whatsoever. But I wonder if we'll see that talent return, because there's not a lot of PvE mechanics where you can have any of your healing over time effects be removed by most enemy mobs or anything like that. Although though I think would be maybe an interesting but probably very annoying mechanic if they were to add something like this for, let's say, a season of Mythic Plus. Besides this though, we have a couple of new talents, like going from Nature's Swiftness, we have a new one called Twin Leaf, where Nature's Swiftness now has 2 charges. This could be very interesting because of the way that you can use Nature's Swiftness to combine it with a variety of different abilities to turn them from a cast into an instant cast. So something like a Regrowth can have a little bit more of a burst heal value, and there's a couple of new talents that have been added that could work with Regrowth in a way where maybe this could be a decent burst heal or group heal synergy in the future. Over here you see that there's Flash of Clarity, and there used to be a talent that kind of builds from Flash of Clarity. That is because that talent has now become a passive for Restoration Druids. That talent being Omen of Clarity, although I can't see Omen of Clarity anywhere in my passives. But Omen of Clarity is a passive that is given for Resto Druids. Maybe the spellbook right now or the talent tree isn't working as effective as it should be. But Omen of Clarity is a passive now that is granted natively, so you don't have to talent 2 points to pick up Flash of Clarity and Omen, which does allow them to shift talents such as Abundance as well as Scenario Ward and even Tranquil Mind up a little bit. They do add a new talent called Wildwood Roots though, where Abundance now reduces the casting of regrowth by 5% per stack. Or it can further empower Scenario Ward's cooldown to be reduced by 10 seconds and its duration being increased by 2 seconds. Further down below Fluorescence, we have a new talent called Renewing Surge, where the cooldown of Swiftman is reduced by up to 40% based on the current target's health. The cooldown is reduced more when the target is in lower health thresholds. So if let's say we have a train dummy here that has barely any health and I put up a Rejuve on him and I Swiftman the target, normally Swiftman has a 15-second CD, but if I use it on a very low health target, it goes down to a 9. So it allows you more aggressive uses of Swiftman in order to help bring up your allies to health. This can combine with other talents such as Verdant Infusion to extend your HOTS, so you can use the ability more aggressively, or Prosperity so you can have 2 charges of Swiftman for even more burst healing. Swiftman can also synergize with hero talents like, for example, Wildstalker and Implant, where Swiftman causes Symbiotic Bloom to grow on the target for 8 seconds. So it has a little bit of this cascading effect where you can use it more regularly, and that can actually make the ability a little bit more potent. A little further down that talent tree, actually right below Verdant Fusion, is a new one called Forest Flow. Consuming Clear Casting now causes your regrowth to also cast a Nourish onto a nearby injured ally at 60% effectiveness, with Nourish preferring targets with the healing over time effects. And this effect actually casts a real Nourish, which heals a friendly target for a decent bit, but also this talent receives 300% bonus from your mastery of Harmony. So if let's say you have multiple allies that have healing over time effects on them, and you end up getting a proc of regrowth as well, or rather proc of Omen of Clarity, if let's say I heal this ally, it should give this guy a free Nourish. And you can see the healing is actually there. It deals about the same amount of healing, or at least close to about the same amount of healing as a regrowth, and it allows Druids to kind of be able to use more Nourishes without necessarily talenting into Nourish, because I don't think there's going to be an opportunity for Grove Guardians to be replaced. It's just such a good talent, and it's possible that maybe in the future we'll see Nourish actually get into play, but this talent does kind of make the capstone or the lower portion of the talent tree a little bit harder to allocate points into. But First Flow maybe could be pretty good as a burst healer cooldown, but I like that synergy and the way that you actually get to utilize Nourish and how it can provide additional healing value and power plays off of your mastery in general. Besides this, another talent that got redesigned is Dream of Scenarios. Now Wrath and Shred will transfer 50% of their damage, while Starfire and Swipe will transfer 30% of the damage onto a healing one nearby ally. But this effect is increased by 200% while Heart of the Wild is active, which allows for cat weaving abilities, or even if you play more of a cast weaver, to continuously heal at least a target every time you cast Shred, or every time you use Swipe, Wrath, Starfire. I would have much preferred this talent to somehow synergize with maybe your Rake, with maybe your Rip, so other abilities could also maybe be a little bit better for this combat healing effectiveness. I also would have loved for this talent, this kind of melee or DPS healing mechanic, to be very similar to some of the other healing classes out there, like monks, for example, with their ancient teachings, where as they do melee abilities, they heal 5 nearby allies, or paladins, when they have melee wings, for example, also have the same effect. They heal like 3 or 4 nearby allies when they use one ability. So I would have loved for Druids to have something like that as well, so you could really commit into the hybrid cat weaving or wrath caster playstyle, but I guess it's just supposed to be more supplementive healing more than anything, though it'll probably still get quite a bit of play in Mythic Plus in general. When you press Heart of the Wild, that healing does go up by quite a bit, so normally it does not that great of healing, but if you are able to get some decent damage with your shreds, that healing can be fairly good. So if you're trying to go for more like a cat damage build where you focused on shredding or swiping enemies, then the amount of additional healing you're able to provide is actually not the worst. Again, I wish it synergized with other things such as a big bite that could maybe heal a group of allies, or maybe a rib that could give some kind of like a trickle healing effect to everybody around you. Because you end up shredding or swiping to build combat points, and then when you're at max combat points, you're going for the bite to deal damage. But I would love for that to have a bit more synergy that can somehow be used to heal everybody around you, even in a very small way. but that's more of a comment on like the thematics of the talent, not really a question of like the numerical value of it. But with that being said, that's going to be the basics of the restoration, the balanced Druids talent tree. I kind of like the Boomkin talent side of things a little bit more than Resto. I think with Resto they added a couple of nice new features that's going to be interesting to experiment with. I do wonder if any of these talents, like for example, someone like Forest Flow, if it will have significant enough value to be played when it comes to raids or maybe even dungeons. But generally, it's good to see the Druids are getting some adjustments here and there, at least when it comes to their individual specs. Where I would have loved to see a pretty decent Druid revamp is the class talent tree, and that is what I'm really personally waiting for. Compared to some of the other classes that have gotten class revamps and talent revamps, from Paladin to Rogue recently over on the PTR, I would have loved to see Druid talent tree to be shifted around a little bit, or maybe add a little bit more arrows in between abilities so you could kind of start over here at the Feral side of things, then talent easily all the way down into the Typhon side, because right now there is a little bit of awkward to path around the Druid class talent tree in general. I feel like it's better than Dragonflight's version, but there's still some limitations there either way, and I would have loved to see a little bit more refinement in that field specifically. But with that being said, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this video, and hope all of you enjoyed. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very, very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community to discuss all of the upcoming Druid changes with the rest of the community. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think about all these changes? What do you like? What do you not like? And what would you want to see in the future? And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.